But it's been a joy to have this opportunity to spend time with all of you, and in a particular way with Archbishop Winsky and Archbishop Brody and Bishop Kinnaman, because whether you know or not, I mean, we all get in our diocese and we just really don't see one another often enough, because we know how busy our worlds can be. Just a little reflection as I'm part of the Encuentro directly, once again, this regional gathering. I go back in my mind to Grapevine, Texas, which is, of course, pre-pandemic and a culminating moment in the process of this burgeoning and blossoming ministry in the Hispanic communities around our nation, but really at the heart of the church. And that journey continues. It was often said, this isn't just the end, it's the end of the beginning, and we continue. And so our presence here today continues this journey. Pope Francis, and I think many of you, if not all of you, have been part of the Synod on Synodality. And Pope Francis looks at that as a journey and a process, that communion, participation, and missionary disciples. And he hopes that even for the world, it can be a living sign of how people can build bridges to one another. Well, the Encuentro, in that sense, has been the heart of synodality, really, without calling it that. It's been bringing people together in many voices and unfolding in our church the beauty of being missionary disciples and bringing our voices together, allowing the Holy Spirit to guide us to be more the body of Christ in this world. So it's truly is a blessing, and in this moment we can offer a little prayer. And what's on my mind from last Sunday is what we celebrated just earlier this morning, when the leper came back filled with thanksgiving, and Jesus said, "Your faith is your salvation." So a faith full with gratitude brings us all together this morning, and let us pray. Lord, we thank you for the gift of faith, the gift of love for the church, the heart that we bring, that the gospel may be alive in the hearts and minds of more and more people, that there may be genuine conversion, communion, participation, and mission. Bless us this morning in our conversations and throughout this day. May we continue to grow in wisdom and knowledge and grace after the mind and heart of your Son, who is Lord forever and ever. Amen.
This morning, we are going to be led in reflection, and we will have more conversations like the ones we started last night. Just as a reminder for those of you who have joined us today, we have 4 ministerial areas. One of them, which is Pastoral Juvenil, vocation, was meant to be vocations first, and we were specifically talking about diocesan priesthood and permanent diaconate. So that's why we have a table on permanent diaconate. This is being done with a picardia. Picardia? Huh? Intentionality, yes. But it sounds too intentional. We don't want to be so straightforward. But, oh, that sounds dangerous. Okay, we want to be able to acknowledge that God is calling among Hispanic men, and sometimes it's difficult to respond to that call because there are obstacles on the way. One of them being maybe that we speak English just like my English, or you speak English to work, and it's not the same to speak the language to work than to study and to learn to deepen in your faith and be able to share with others or accompany others. There are many others, and I'm not going to go into them, but We know that God continues to call among Hispanic men who are very active in our parish communities, in the ecclesial movements that sustain the life of our parishes as well. And so in order to do that, there are different ways in which different dioceses are responding to it. So this conversation is happening here, and right now, the dioceses that are here are already in either phase 1, 2, or 3 of implementing this conversation that began with our bishops in Region 5 and with the support of bishops in Region 14. So we have, and they're looking straight at me, but we have the program in Biloxi, which is on their second year, first year candidacy, and Mobile is on their first year of aspirancy. And Louisville, not here, but they are already on their inquiry. Lafayette is on their first year of aspirancy. First year of aspirancy. So there are already, Lexington is not here, but Lexington also has a program of permanent diacon in Spanish. Owensboro is not here, but I know that they've had already an experience ordaining for men to permanent diaconate. So it is happening. If it's not happening in your diocese, I cannot tell you the future, but it might. At least if some of you know that there is that reality or would like to know more what's happening, this conversation here is already a step forward, okay? So if you feel the call to be part of this table, I invite you to consider that. But then those of you who are maybe Pastoral Juvenil, Vocations is working on that table over there. Pastoral Juvenil alone, I guess, is on that table over there. And then we have Family Life Ministry Formation. Our bishops will walk around and maybe sit if they hear something that is being interesting. There are many interesting conversations happening. I'm very committed. We can feel that. So I want to introduce so that part is clear. Feel free to join the table that you know it's calling you, because what we want after this is continuity. How do we continue collaborating and doing what this says, not the previous one? Okay. I'm going to introduce Dr. Hosffman Ospino. He's a native of Colombia, and this is where everybody applauds. Where he pursued undergraduate studies in philosophy. He holds a master's in theology with a concentration in church history and a PhD in theology and education from Boston College. His research explores the dialogue between faith and culture and the impact of this interchange upon Catholic theological education, catechesis, and ministry. He has served as the principal investigator for several national recognized studies on how the Hispanic Catholic presence is transforming parishes, schools, and organizations. He has authored and edited it should be more than a dozen right now, maybe close to 2. He is a frequent speaker at national and international events. He's actively involved in ministry and faith formation projects in various parts of the United States. He is a father of 2 beautiful children. He's a husband, a very beautiful woman, Lupita. And I don't know how he does it to balance everything else he does and also his family and the students at Boston College, but he's doing it. Thank you for being with us. At a personal level, you are an inspiration in what Hispanic ministry is today and where it should go in the next few years. And in some parts, you're very intense, but we need you to be intense, to open our eyes and do something while we're able to do something for the generation that is coming right after us. So this is our time. About how many years ago? 15, 16, the first ships came, brought the gospel. They did what they could. Archbishop Rodi was talking about that last night and on his journey from Mobile to over here. and maybe things have not changed much. I hope they have. At least you didn't come riding a horse, so that's good. But some others chose some other means to come here too, and we know that. A motorcycle, for example. And so they did what they could at that moment in history. It is our time now, and we are here to do that. So thank you, Dr. Ospino.
Gracias, Olga. Thank you very much, everyone. Great to have the bishops from this diocese gathered with us, and to know that there are members of different offices at the diocesan level. Some of you are also working connected to parish life and organizations, movements. So there's a lot, going on in our diocese. I'm always weary about speaking about Hispanic ministry to people who are experts on the field, because even though I'm highly involved in ministry in my own parish, my wife and I oversee ministry in a parish. She does all the work, I take the credit. And we also work in the Archdiocese of Boston and on matters of ministry. I'm involved in different matters, practical matters related to accompaniment, pastoral accompaniment. Much of my entry point actually into these conversations is from an academic perspective, from a pastoral theological perspective. I do research, looking at the macro level, and I also try to provide analysis, that might help us create frameworks, that allow us to do our work, together, en conjunto, without, feeling isolated. Because that's one of the challenges that we all often experience in ministry. Those of you who are doing youth ministry, you might feel that you are alone and that you are carrying most of the burden. You are not. No? So those of you who are working with families might feel that you are actually working alone and that you are carrying most of the burden. You are not. The bishops might feel that they are alone and that they are carrying all the burden in the diocese, and they are not, and they are. He says. Same thing with the priests, same thing with the deacons, about religious, lay leaders. We all, somehow believe that what we are doing, is certainly the most important thing. And yes, it is, but we're not alone. And I think that having these conversations en conjunto, having these conversations together, allow us to get a bigger perspective, a wider perspective. So with that disclaimer, I'm going to be leading the conversation for the next 3 hours. So bear with me. I'll try not to be boring, and I'll try to be as engaging. Some of you have already heard some of the information that I want to share, but again, the whole point is to imagine how do we connect, parishes with dioceses, ministries that are doing straightforward evangelization, with religious education, with youth ministry, with family life, with the accompaniment of the emerging dynamic of lay ecclesial movements, which is a very important dynamic, at least in the context of Hispanic ministry. Sometimes we overemphasize what happens in parishes and in the context of the regular catechetical liturgical life of the parish. And that is key. Everything actually points towards the Eucharistic celebration and how we form community together. But there's also another engine of spiritual life that is sustaining Hispanic Catholics, and more so since the last 30 or 40, actually 40, 50 years. And that is the large movement or large wave of ecclesial movements, Catholic Charismatic Renewal, Cursillo, Neo-Catechumenal Way, and many others that are injecting a lot of life and are supporting communities. But sometimes those groups are working in isolation as well, okay? Sometimes they have their own little corner, still the church, yet not in communion with the rest of the church. So how do we imagine ourselves working together with all these dynamics? So first, this is the dynamic that we're going to use. We're going to divide this morning in 3 moments, okay? And the first moment is I want to just take a brief, I'm going to provide a key overview of how COVID-19 has created a new set of expectations vis-a-vis Hispanic ministry. Okay, and I will offer some negative impact of COVID-19 upon what we have done and are doing in vis-a-vis Hispanic ministry, and then we'll look at the positive dynamics related to that emerged from COVID-19. You know, the pandemic is not over. As a matter of fact, every day, 400 people die on questions related to COVID-19. Okay, so that's still a lot of people. And many of those people who are dying, they tend to be people who are on the older side of their life cycle, but many of them are actually people from minoritized communities who are struggling with preconditions, diabetes, who are lack of health care, and many of them are Hispanic. No, so it's not over yet. And so we need to keep that in mind. So I want to offer a presentation, and then I'm going to send you back into your groups, just to debrief a little bit. So the conversation is not a monologue, although most of the time it's going to be a monologue. I'm only presenting, but I will send you back into your groups, your reactions, your thoughts, and so on. Then we'll come back, and we're going to look at what I want to call the evolution of Hispanic ministry. We're going to look at the question of synodality, how in the Latino community we have been doing synodality, the impact of synodality. We'll go back to the groups, and then I'm going to introduce you to a recent study that I just finished, on Catholic organizations serving Hispanic youth. And actually, the report is going to be published next month, so I'll give you a preview of some of the dynamics or the insights that are emerging from this. If you're a Roman Catholic, if you already have been involved in ministry, don't worry, you're not going to see that much new, But again, these studies help us organize information. And towards the end, we're going to do an exercise that I just want to introduce you to the question of having an inventory of pastoral needs, and how an inventory of pastoral needs would allow us to determine areas of formation and priorities in our dioceses, offices, and communities. So that's pretty much the plan for this morning. Then in the afternoon, Olga and her team are going to guide us through a series of short presentations, and that will illustrate some of what we are doing today. So let's begin with the evolution of priorities in Hispanic Catholic ministry, and as I said, the impact of COVID-19. Let's begin with the obvious, as Paulo Freire used to say. So COVID-19 was brutal upon the Hispanic community. We know that. It was brutal upon the Black community as well, minoritized communities. But in particular, it was difficult upon the Latino community, because the Latino community in general did not have the chance to be like many of us who are highly educated, who have white-collar jobs, to stay home and do our jobs from an isolated office, from our homes, and from our computers. So we know that in the United States of America, as a matter of fact, 80%, more than 80% of Hispanics work in what would be called service industry, blue-collar jobs, cleaning, factories, the farm working. So many of them did not have the luxury to stay home. So they had to go and be among the first responders. They had to be among those, indispensable employees who had to be present during the pandemic. So the loss was huge. And also many of, actually hundreds of thousands of Hispanics contracted COVID-19, before there was any treatment, before there were any vaccines. So many of them, are actually suffering the effects of COVID, the post-COVID, what they call the post-COVID effects. So that's the first thing that we need to say. Negatively, Hispanics, were highly impacted in our parishes, in our communities. Many of our parishioners died. Many of our parishioners actually lost relatives. I will share about a study that I'm currently conducting. I'm looking at 8 parishes nationwide, and in these parishes, I've been interviewing people, pastors and pastoral leaders and others, asking them about the impact of COVID-19 in their communities. There's a parish in the Archdiocese of Seattle, and the pastor, for instance, was sharing with me that in this parish that is almost 60-70% Hispanic, literally, when he asked, raise your hand if you lost someone, a friend, a relative, a close relative to COVID-19. Practically everybody's hands went up. Practically everybody's hands went up. So the emotional, the physical, the spiritual impact of COVID-19 is something that must that must be integrated in how we are doing, in what we are doing vis-a-vis the pastoral accompaniment of the Latino community, okay? Sometimes in our ministry, we feel or we tend to act or operate as if we can move on, like this is something of the past, or maybe this is not that important. No, very few homilies today are actually addressing the effects of COVID-19. How many of us in our dioceses, for instance, have developed new ministries to accompany people who were impacted by COVID-19? But this is not only about about the direct impact. We should also start thinking about the indirect impact of COVID-19 upon the Hispanic community. I wanna look at the question of young people, particularly, and education. We know that 94% of Hispanic children who are school age in the United States of America go to public schools. Okay, 94%. They go to public schools. And we also know that more than 70% of the children who go to public schools, Hispanic children who go to public schools, go to underperforming schools. Okay, so technically, our children are losing on every side of the bargain. Okay, so most of these children that are going to public schools and going not only that, but hyper segregated and underperforming public schools, during those 2 years of the pandemic, actually receive the worst possible education that compared to the rest of the population in this country. White kids also were affected, Asian kids, Black kids, and so on. But particularly Hispanic and Black kids were more impacted by the poor response of many of our public schools to COVID-19. Why do we have to care about this? A lot. Because many of those kids today, and I don't have the data yet, but the Department of Education should be releasing those sets of data very shortly on this. But the rate of dropout among Hispanics is increasing, and it's increasing fast. Okay, and that's going to affect us. It's going to affect us because it's going to have an impact on who's going to go to college, who's going to finish high school, who's going to go to college, who is going to be supporting our communities into the future. So it's going to have a major impact. Thank God for Catholic schools. Catholic schools did an excellent job, okay? And all across the board, not perfect, but overall Catholic schools kind of, waived, or navigated, this situation better than any other school system, except for other private schools. Okay, what's the nuance here, or the caveat? That only 280,000 children go to Catholic or Hispanic go to Catholic schools. Okay, so there are 15 million young Hispanics who are school age, who live in the United States of America, but only 300,000 or close to 300,000 benefit from Catholic schools. So good for those who, and we appreciate the work of Catholic educators, and good for those kids who actually went to go to Catholic schools. But we got a bigger problem out there. We got a bigger problem out there because if many of those kids, those young people, now continue to drop out, if they are not prepared to go to college, the impact could be upon millions of these young Hispanics, many of them Roman Catholic. Okay, so again, putting things in perspective. This is putting things in perspective as to why we should not treat COVID-19 or its effects lightly. This is going to cause a major, a wave of consequences that we should not ignore. And that's for those of you particularly who are doing Catholic education, religious education, and ministry. During the pandemic, we lost almost 40,000 Hispanic children going to Catholic schools. In 2006, there were 280,000 Hispanic children going to Catholic schools. In 2019, there were 320,000 going to Catholic schools. After 2021, by 2021, we had lost 40,000 of those kids. The pandemic put us back to 2006, okay, in terms of the progress that we had made in Catholic schools. It drew, and that's a lot, friends. That's a decade and a half of great efforts in Catholic schools to get more Hispanic children enrolled in our Catholic schools. One pandemic, one major crisis set us back a decade and a half, okay? Now, my hope and the hope of everybody is that eventually we'll bounce back. We will bounce back, and we need to keep working at it. But the impact is measurable, and we know already. We know already what's happening. And in terms of migration, the last thing I want to say about migration is about migration, and it has to do with the fact that particularly since 2016, the waves of migration from Latin America, or the numbers of migrants from Latin America, have plummeted. Okay, have significantly plummeted. And that is, for some people that is good. For other people that is problematic, and so on. But how does that affect us in our Catholic churches? Keep in mind that most Catholic churches in the United States of America that have Hispanic ministry define Hispanic ministry primarily as ministry with immigrants, primarily ministry in Spanish. When we say St. Mary's Parish has Hispanic ministry, what do we have in mind? What's in the background? We serve Mass, we do Mass in Spanish, we celebrate the sacraments in Spanish, and we also do religious education in Spanish or Spanglish, or we do English and Spanish bilingually. Okay, that's what's in the back of the mind. So our thousands of Catholic parishes have relied and over-relied on a constant flux of immigrants coming to our communities. Prior to 2016, every year, about 1 million immigrants from Latin America made the United States their home per year. Every year, 1 million. Of that 1 million, around 300,000 would cross the border, undocumented or and so on. But almost 700,000 did not come to the country illegally. Almost 700,000 actually landed on our airports or came through family reunification, which is something that we as Catholics support very much. That's the type of immigration reform that we want. We want immigration reform that supports and advances family reunification. After 2016, those numbers plummeted. Now, there are ups and downs about that, you know. On the one hand, there is more emphasis on putting pressure on Latin American nations and Caribbean nations to get their act together so they can actually provide better conditions of life for the people who live there and they don't have to come into the United States, no? But on the other hand, what we are seeing is that many families continue to be separated because the processes, the backlog in migration processes actually has increased, you know? Now, if somebody had to wait, for instance, a spouse, a child, or a brother, a sister, a father, a mother, had to wait 1 year or 6 months or a year and a half, now the wait could easily be 5, 6, 7 years. For a family, for a couple of parents waiting for the child to be brought into the United States 5 or 6 years, that's brutal. That means you know, and I have seen it in my own parish. I have seen it in many communities. Many parents migrate to the United States when their children are 6, 7, 8, okay? They wait 7 years for their children to reunite with their children. Then they get a 14-year-old. They are not their children anymore. They're not their children. And that has major impact in the lives of the Latino community. So now the levels of migration from Latin America are much lower. You know, even with the Biden administration, there was some hope that the numbers were gonna increase. As a matter of fact, no. As a matter of fact, the Biden administration has increased the number of deportations. No, the Biden administration maintains many of the immigration policies that were implemented in previous years. Much of that connects to COVID-19. Okay, so a lot of these dynamics began with the 2016 administration, or not began, but were exacerbated by policies established there. But the COVID-19 pandemic made it worse. Leadership in the Catholic Church. Now, this is quite interesting. If you're Latino, Latina, you have heard the expression, Hispanics are the last to come and the first one to go. Have you heard that? Yes. And that's exactly what's been happening, Throughout the United States of America, we lost dozens of diocesan directors of Hispanic ministry. The change was dramatic. So many dioceses took long, very long, in hiring a diocesan director of Hispanic ministry or a parish director of Hispanic ministry. But because of finances, many dioceses are struggling, and the last thing you want to be is a bishop when you have to handle those budgets and those budgets are shrinking, and you got to make those decisions. Yet, in many dioceses throughout the United States, we lost Latinos in offices of Hispanic ministry, in offices of religious education, in offices of youth ministry, in parish offices. Who survived most of these layoffs during the time of the pandemic? Deacons, vowed religious, priests, and just a handful of lay leaders, okay? And a handful of lay leaders. Many dioceses reconfigured offices during the time of the pandemic, and when they retained the Latinos, they increased the workload by 30, 40, 50, sometimes more percent, okay? A larger percent. So we still need to do the data, Honestly, I wish I had the time to be collecting all this data and so on, but right now, this is emerging from conversations, for instance, with the president of the National Catholic Association of Diocesan Directors of Hispanic Ministry. This is emerging from conversations that we are having at the national level, people observing this. In your dioceses, and actually I would encourage SEPI to do this, you need to do also an analysis of how many Latinos have you lost in ministry. especially, and and I go back to that expression, Latinos are the last to come and to arrive, the first ones to go in a time of crisis. And that is very true. Many dioceses, took years. Here in the Southeast, many of your dioceses benefit from the partnership with the Catholic Extension Society, and you have been forming leaders to, Hispanic leaders to serve in these communities. Well, guess what? Many of those leaders, they were supposed to be the hope for ministries in our dioceses. Many of them are actually gone. They were not retained by dioceses. They were not retained by parishes. And in terms of structures, now we continue to reconfigure dioceses. Here in the Southeast and the Southwest, you have not been as hardly hit by parish reconfigurations, okay? Thank God. As a matter of fact, you are growing, you are building churches, and I hope that you continue to build new parishes and new communities because you are growing. The Northeast and the Midwest actually continue to close parishes, a galore, So we have closed more than 4,000 parishes nationwide. We have lost more than 8,000 Catholic schools, And when everybody thought that we were going to stop closing that we had hit bottom with Catholic schools, guess what? During the days of the pandemic, just the first year of the pandemic, we lost 300 Catholic schools nationwide, okay? 300 Catholic schools. So at the level of structures, when we think of the Hispanic community as the future, well, we cannot build a future of good wishes. We cannot build a future simply hoping that Latinos are going to retain their faith and that they are going to eventually go back to church and baptize their children and be practicing Catholics. We need those structures. We need to retain those structures. We need our dioceses as much as possible to not only preserve what they have, but also shift those resources to serve this community. The pandemic overall, and this is my reading, it could be it's a bit of a negative reading, but I believe that the pandemic set us back on a lot of these efforts. If you are working in Hispanic ministry, and we know that it takes years to cultivate, many years to cultivate a Hispanic leader so they can be ready to work at the diocesan level. There aren't that many Hispanic leaders working at the diocesan level. Not many, and it takes years, maybe decades. For those of you, for the bishops, you know that it takes many years to cultivate a Hispanic priest, so they can become chancellors, so they can assume these responsibilities. There aren't that many Hispanic priests out there who can actually do these jobs, or who are prepared to do these jobs, who are mentored to do these jobs. But we have lost many of those key leaders, and we have lost many of those structures. As a matter of fact, in terms of leaders, when dioceses were shifting to reconfiguring offices, many of the Hispanic leaders opted to go not to. They decided to move to the get other jobs. But not everything is negative. There's also some positive aspects that we also need to highlight about the pandemic. On the one hand, and I want to go back to the study that I mentioned. I'm looking at these 8 parishes, in different parts of the country, and this is a longitudinal study. So this is a group of parishes in Seattle, the Archdiocese of Chicago, Archdiocese of Boston, New York. I'm looking at a parish in the Diocese of Virginia, looking at a parish in Atlanta, Archdiocese of Los Angeles. So there are 8 parishes that we're following, and we're in year 2 of this longitudinal study. We're about to enter year 3. I think I'm going to stop year 3 unless I find a funder who helps me with year 4, but I don't think that I need a year for that. I think that the point that I wanted to, or the data that I wanted to gather is already there. What did I find? What am I finding in terms of the Hispanic community? Resilience, friends, resilience. The level of resilience of the Hispanic community has been inspirational, very inspirational. The Hispanic community had major losses, as you know, highly impacted, but in most dioceses that have parishes with Hispanic ministry, those communities were the first ones to bounce back at the time of the pandemic. And one of the reasons that people name is, hey, if we are working, if we have to go out and work, if we have to be at the restaurant or at the factory or at the farm, and we're already with other people, so how come we cannot be with our people in our churches? And then people were ready to go to the churches, no? So on average, in some dioceses, while it might have taken 2 to 3 months to a white Euro-American parish to return to worship on Sunday in the church, it took about a month for Hispanic communities to return. No? And that's amazing. The level of resilience. The Latino community said, we're going to do it. No, we're going to do it. And that actually shows the potential that the Latino community has to inform our ministries, in our communities. Something that is very positive is the rise of virtual means and the use of social media. So now the pandemic, not only, sometimes we reduce the response to the pandemic when it comes to technology to masses on Zoom, or masses on YouTube. And that's only one part, no? By the way, Mark Shaves, who is a sociologist at Duke University, who has been conducting the national study of congregations for many years, for more than a decade. Mark Shaves, released some data a couple of years ago, actually right after the pandemic, and it was fascinating to see that when you look at all the religious communities, faith communities, Protestant, Christian Catholic, Jews, Muslims, and other groups in the United States of America, the group that was most ill prepared to respond to the pandemic, guess what? Who that is? Roman Catholics. We were the ones worst prepared for that, and we did not have an infrastructure to respond to the pandemic in terms of technology. We did not have means to reach out to our communities. Small Protestant communities have a regular system of communicating and staying in touch with their parishioners. We as Roman Catholics, we do have those systems, but they affect only a small number of people, mainly those who come to church, but not everyone else, no? And size always affects us. Size always impacts us, no? A small evangelical community has 300 or 400 people, so they can reach out to those 300 or 400 people just in the blink of an eye. When we have 7,000 parishes, 7,000 families, for instance, in one parish, when the territorial expansion of our community is so wide that it takes hours, to move from one place to another, then it makes it difficult for us. But in any case, one of the great responses here is that Latinos were quick to embrace social media, and they were quick to embrace the internet, YouTube, and other virtual means to stay in touch during the pandemic, okay? And many of those ministries actually worked well. Now, when I was asking, when I was surveying some of these parishes that are part of the study, I was asking them, what platforms did they use? Did they use Facebook? Did they use Twitter? Did they use TikTok? Did they use Instagram? And so on. And to my surprise, the great champion of, in terms of the apps in the Latino community that kept people going was WhatsApp. It was WhatsApp. I didn't even see that one coming. But then I asked my wife, in the parish, how do you keep in touch with all the people in the community through the activities? And she said, WhatsApp. Everybody does it. So that's actually an interesting dynamic. And many of those groups stay. Something that actually was interesting as well is that during the pandemic, many Latinos actually developed transnational connections with Latin America and the Caribbean. So since you don't have to be physically now meeting with people, so they started attending masses in Peru, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Argentina, in the Dominican Republic. And then people who from all these countries started joining prayer groups via WhatsApp, prayer groups, conversations, Bible study groups, and so on, okay? So there is potential there for ministry. There's potential there for ministry. Because sometimes in our ministries, in our dioceses, we over-rely on more complex, more sophisticated means to reach out to the Latino community. And guess what? The simpler you keep it, the better. And WhatsApp works a miracle, okay? So WhatsApp has been the piece. And another aspect that I found quite interesting, that we find interesting in terms of the positive aspects related to the pandemic, the Latino community was very quick to emphasize social ministry. Quick ministries of outreach to the sick, bringing food to people who had lost jobs, taking care of people who, there was a relative who was in the hospital, somebody lost someone, somebody had to travel, and so on. Latino communities in general, demonstrated a strong sense of social outreach. That led to the rise of some social ministries. For instance, giving food to people who were hungry, visiting the sick, and so on. So something that I'm observing these days is that many of the Hispanic communities, in light of the pandemic, actually reignited social ministries in their communities. But the downside of that is that they're working on their own. Most of these ministries do not have diocesan support. For instance, how many of us from our dioceses, from the cluster of our diocese, has surveyed how many of these social ministries exist in parishes? How many of us are actually joining these WhatsApp groups that were created during the pandemic and that continue to support the life of the community? Okay? So, you got 3 minutes, 4 minutes on your tables. And the question is very simple, okay? How did you see what you just heard about the pandemic in the Latino community, and how can your offices engage these realities, both positive and negative? Okay? 3 or 4, actually, these are large groups. Let's take 5 minutes, okay? 5 minutes, initial reactions, okay? We don't have to solve all the problems of the world, just initial reactions.
So, what you just said, the use of WhatsApp was critical. Meetings happen also. I personally give workshops. So, I've got a critical information because everything that we did beginning with the lockdown is electronic. Social work rapidly. I remember during lockdown, one of our parishes, St. Jude's, began distributing groceries. Our formation became a distribution. We tried candidates to do it on Zoom 1 month. We said, forget it. I'm going to take the risk. First of all, see the instruction system saying that. Things we use. Also, with the new class 2025, we're using WhatsApp. Those companies Google Translator. It goes to Spanish. It's been very good. And keep track of homework assignments on the babies. Very efficient. I've seen our guys in school the rest of the Hispanic history is it's very eye-opening. The statistics are really good. There's people that
in our diocese, we use the second language. But I'd say probably the Hispanic population is now the influx of immigrants. Probably from that.
Do you have an idea of how
Yeah, I was going to ask
very few low-income people are in our campus. Jim the other day, you're dropping them off at high school, they're driving Mercedes, they're driving Lexuses and stuff like that. Council meeting a month ago. Finance meeting. Our church actually did it. How many of those people are on scholarships and can't afford it? Another comes out of the church budget to give people scholarship help. Large regions. Most of it is people that are pretty well off.
There's just things more. I would say in my own diocese.
It's expensive. Yeah, it's expensive. I remember when we were there, I was always impressed when I was got graded $5 each month to cover our tuition. And then one day I'll be responsible enough to mom to leave the $5.
we had nuns teaching. And they, when I was in school, what was none of that class. And
But I want to say that only over 50% of the students are a lot of enterprises in schools. So, they're not, cannot do it.
I remember Jim talked about it.
It's always a possibility of school. But there's a stigma that even if the doors are open for financial
see, that was going to be my report. I think the Hispanic population that I knew was always very proud. And they did not, they couldn't afford it. Except that. When I was younger, I was still the same.
But right now, there's idea that all of our capabilities that And they were fed up with the public school. They were trying to look at this. It's a lot of what and so I explained to them what I'm in contact and the school with that was a beautiful story. The school already have closed down the registration. They went and visited us. When we were there, they were just how beautiful that this school was all that and the school actually they don't know kids are but it's almost like people tend to close down because they use the pessimism. Okay, thank you. You have to be in a company from somebody capable of English speaking.
Okay, so let me continue, and then we'll return to this conversation. So you've been sitting for about an hour already, believe it or not. And for those of you who feel like it, if you want to just stand up for 1 minute, do a stretch break, just where you are, stretch, get the blood flowing a little bit. That helps a lot. Okay, let's sit down. Okay, so now COVID-19 is only one lens, is just but one lens that allows us to set the framework, in terms of the needs that are emerging in Hispanic ministry. For instance, one of the areas I believe that will eventually need to emerge in terms of pastoral ministries in parishes is, we need ministries of accompaniment, spiritual accompaniment in our communities that address the losses that our faith community had during this pandemic. Many Latinos lost their jobs as well, as you know well. Many Latinos have not recovered health-wise because of this. We know the impact upon young people as well. So that calls for ministries that pay close attention to these dynamics in our parishes and our dioceses. I'm going to provide another framework, not to look at Hispanic ministry today, but this time we're going to use history. We're going to do a historical overview, of how Hispanic ministry has been evolving, over the years. So I want to just get, by a sense of hands, by a show of hands, get a sense of how long have you been working with the Latino community? Is anybody here who's been working with the Latino community for more than 50 years? Who is it? Okay. 50 years, no? Okay, good. What about 40 to 50 years? 40 to 50 years, the two bishops here. Very good. What about 30 to 40 years? 30 to 40 years. What about 20 to 30 years? Okay, a few more hands. 22. What about 10 to 20 years? Okay. What about 5 to 10 years? And how many of you began ministry in working with the Latino community in the last 5 years? And how many of you do not work at all with the Latino community? Okay, so that last question was kind of a rhetorical question, because one day a student came into my office and asked me, Dr. Ospino, I would like to take your class on Hispanic ministry. I used to teach a seminar on Hispanic ministry in a graduate course, and then the student said, I would like to take your class. What are you going to be covering? And I said, well, we're going to look at the history and the presence and the needs and the challenges and the contributions of the Latino community. So the student, just goes into a moment of silence and says, I actually don't think that I'm going to be working with Latinos, in my ministry. And I said, unless you're planning on moving to Siberia or another country, that's not going to happen. I mean, we all have to work with the Latino community, especially in this increasingly Hispanic church. So that's not actually, it's quite interesting that one of the fastest growing ministries in England is Hispanic ministry. One of the fastest growing ministries in South Korea is Hispanic ministry. Did you know that? Peruvians moving to South Korea, it's a large population there. And actually, they are sending students, many of them nuns and priests, to Mexico and to the United States to learn how to work with the Latino community in South Korea. Imagine that, So, Latino, Hispanic, but what kind of Hispanic ministry is needed today? Some of us know, and for instance, the bishops who have been working with the Latino community for at least 4 decades and so on, you have been part of many of these conversations for all this time, how to do this. Most likely you did it in your own community, in your own parishes, and you've been at countless conversations as to how to best work with this community. If you were alive in the 1960s, 70s, early 80s, many of the conversations about Hispanic ministry, keep in mind, 1960, there were only 6 million Hispanics in the United States of America. Most of them self-identified as Catholic, religiously as Catholic, okay? So these Hispanics, they lived mostly, in the 1960s, they lived mostly in the Southwest, Southeast, but there was not a common name for this community. Hispanic had not been yet used to call this community. So, if you were living in California, everybody's a Mexican. It's just that's pure Mexican. Like, I'm sorry, I was born in Venezuela. Well, you're in California, you're a Mexican. And if you were living in Florida, everybody is Cubano, and it's just like, I'm sorry, I was born in the Dominican Republic, Chico, you're Cubano, it's just that, right? So, and then if you were living in the Northeast, most likely you will be, everybody's Puerto Rican, just Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, New York, Boston. So it was assumed that those were the 3 biggest blocks, Mexicans, Cubans, and Puerto Ricans. But very little interest in, as a matter of fact, in the different differences among these groups, or commonalities as well. Some pastoral offices actually, use the term the Spanish speaking. Okay, so that's how Latinos were called. And dioceses established the offices of the Spanish speaking, but that was a term that actually millions of Hispanics did not like. Why? Because they did not speak Spanish, especially those Mexican Americans who had been here for 10, 12, 14 generations. Their last names are still Rodriguez, Cruz, Perez, but they speak no Spanish at all, So, and still, and we have many of those. So in the 1960s and 70s, whatever we spoke about Hispanic ministry, it was mainly an exercise of the Catholic Church trying to understand this reality. Hispanics in general were perceived as foreigners, as aliens, okay? Even though Hispanics have been in this land, and we're in San Agustin, as a matter of fact, of all places, have been in this land for more than 5 centuries. Still for many people, many people were wondering, what do we do with these Hispanics? What do we do with these, with all these people that are arriving? We didn't know they exist, okay? So we're trying to figure out, to understand the needs, to understand the challenges, to understand the contributions of the Latino community. And much of those, in many of those efforts, actually were associated with the social movements of the 1960s, and 70s. Movements for equality. For instance, if you were in the Southwest, there was a lot of conversation about the Chicano movement. Hispanic priests organized themselves in a group called Padres. Hispanic sisters organized themselves in a group called Hermanas. So there was a lot of emphasis and a lot of conversation on social justice, and yet the Hispanic community remained in the margins of society, and in the margins of the church. So most likely, when the two of you bishops, when you began doing ministry, most likely you did ministry in isolated parishes that would serve the Spanish-speaking community, and that's how it operated in most parts of the United States, except in the very borderlands, Brownsville, San Diego, Phoenix, Miami, definitely. So there were more Latinos, and so it wasn't that separate. But in the rest of the country, it was the isolated parish with the isolated priest and so on. This is the time, 1960s and 70s, when the Catholic Church in the United States of America develops a strong missionary feeling, zeal, to go and do mission in Latin America. Okay, so there's a lot of religious orders going to Latin America. There's a lot of diocesan priests going to Latin America, sponsored by bishops in the United States. Cardinal Cushing, in the 1960s, was someone who was definitely very supportive of these dynamics. So the upside of that was that these priests who went to Latin America, these vowed religious women and men who went to Latin America, after 10, 15, 20 years, returned to the United States of America and became the champions of Hispanic ministry. They spoke the language, they understood the culture, and they knew what the sensibilities of the Latino community. As a matter of fact, even to this day, 2022, the vast majority of priests and vowed religious who do Hispanic ministry in the United States of America en español are white Euro-American. The majority, even to this day, because many of these people took interest in the Latino community. They learned the language, they traveled, and they developed the intercultural competencies to work with this community. So 1985, the Latino community continues to grow. 6 million Latinos in the United States in 1960. By 1970, the number had risen to about 10 million plus. By 1980, there were about 14, 15 million Hispanics in the United States. So growing fast, growing fast. Then comes the next block, historical block that I want to use. Again, these historical moments, they are my own analysis. So you can disagree, you can develop your own. I just want to use them as categories for us to understand what's been happening. 1985. What happened in 1985? The third national encuentro. Were you there at the third national encuentro, Archbishop? No. Were you at the third national? You were at the third national? No kidding. You were there, Ondina. Excellent. Who else was on the third encuentro? Oh my, so it was just wonderful. Over there as well. Okay, just great to know people, to meet people. Do you know that Edgar Beltran, who was the mastermind of those encuentros, died this past June? So actually in May, he died in May of this year. That's right. So Edgar was the one who designed many of these pieces. So the third encuentro was literally this kind of not coming of age of the Latino community, but it was an opportunity for the entire church in the United States of America to be more attentive and grow in awareness about the Latino community, this time not waiting for someone to say we have to work with Latinos, but it was the Latino community that was saying, here we are, and we need, and they made demands that any baptized Catholic makes, we need an institution that pays attention to us. And guess what? The Catholic bishops of the United States of America paid attention to it, not only because they were the ones who convoked the third encuentro, but 2 years later, they wrote a national pastoral plan for Hispanic ministry. How many of you have read the National Pastoral Plan for Hispanic Ministry in 1987? Very good, okay? And I noticed that most of you are Latinos, no? Those of you who have read it. But if you didn't read that plan, read it for historical references, but there's one that is right now being written, and it's in process, so most likely, according to what I hear from the USCCB, it might be approved next year, so we'll see how that goes. There will be a new pastoral plan. So the bishops of the United States of America say, hey, yes, we have to do something, and this is not only Father Jim, Father Tom, Father Michael working with the Latino community, or Father Pedro, Father Juan, or Sister Maria. This is everyone needs to be engaged in Latino ministry. Everyone. So the pastoral plan opens the doors and encourages the Latino community, the Catholic Church, not only the Latino community, but the Catholic Church, to develop structures, more structures. And between 1985 and 2000, I would say, we can call this the heyday of Hispanic ministry in the United States at the structural level, at the ecclesial structural level. So it was the heyday. And that heyday, at the same time, would coincide with the largest migration wave from Latin America that we have had. As a matter of fact, by 1995, more than half of all Hispanics in the United States of America were immigrants, okay? By 1995, it's the peak of migration from Latin America. So the bishops and dioceses and parishes were ready to respond in many ways. They had created diocesan offices of Hispanic ministry, parish offices of Hispanic ministry, and so on, okay? And also they created regional offices. CEPI, as a matter of fact, was a pioneer of what other regional offices would be. CEPI had been doing the work since the 1970s, I believe, isn't it? In what year was CEPI established? 78. So CEPI was ahead of the game, to this particular response. And many of the pastoral institutes that were created at the regional level were modeled around the work that CEPI was doing, as well as the Mexican American Catholic Center, okay? So it's the heyday of organization and structures. And I have to say, I want to emphasize this heyday thing because we were effective. Dioceses were effective in the organization of Hispanic ministry because they have the structure, they have the regional institutes, and they had the offices. And when they established offices, they hired personnel. Bishops asked their priests to learn the language, to learn Spanish. Bishops asked their priests to be attentive to this. So it was a whole movement, an organized movement, and it worked well. Not perfectly. There were a lot of downsides as well. No, for instance, I'll give you one downside, which we're still living today. One of the downsides is that these offices of Hispanic ministry, of course, you need a vibrant leader. So then let's find out a vibrant leader. Let's imagine Sister Ondina. So Sister Ondina, here's this, young sister, with a lot of energy, with a lot of ideas, and here she comes and she says, of course I can take care of the Latino community. And guess what happened? Everybody else said, good luck, Sister Ondina. So everyone else, started doing their work with other groups, mainly white Euro-Americans, English speaking. And then Sister Rondina was in charge. And you see this in many dioceses. For instance, many offices of Hispanic ministry are in charge of ministry for half of the diocese, while you have 15 offices in charge of the other half of the diocese, And you'd say, like, what's wrong with this picture, So, but that was one of the misunderstandings of the office of Hispanic ministry back then. But we haven't learned the lesson. We still do it in many dioceses, We simply assume that the person in charge of Hispanic ministry is the person who does religious education with the Latino community, youth ministry with the Latino community, spiritual formation with the Latino community, evangelization with the Latino community, family life ministry with the Latino community, and on and on and on and on. Vocations as well, and many other ministries. So that's not the best arrangement. So structures work well, provided us with a good sense of this. So these offices were growing. These regional offices were doing a lot of work, for instance, in terms of formation. What you are doing today, thank you, Sally, thank you, because you have kept doing exactly, following that vision of the third encuentro. You keep going at it. You keep forming leaders. You keep creating structures. You keep creating consciousness. 2000, what happened in 2000? Some of you might have been invited to the Encuentro 2000. How many of you went to Encuentro 2000? Oh my gosh, actually, there are more people who went to the third Encuentro than the Encuentro 2000. You went to Encuentro 2000? Yes. Okay, so the Encuentro 2000, the bishops of the United States of America and the offices at the USCCB, which, I still want to understand well, maybe you bishops understand them better, but so there was a decision there, Somebody made the decision that we didn't need another Encuentro of Latinos. Why? Because by the year 2000, the number of Latinos had gone up to almost 30 million people, okay? So, wow, that was a huge number, So we don't need something that we need to start looking at Latinos now in the context of a multicultural church. And the decision was made that instead of a fourth Encuentro of Latinos, we're going to do a multicultural Encuentro in Los Angeles. So a lot of people went to Los Angeles. I did not go. And in 2000, the emphasis began to be placed on the idea of multicultural offices, We celebrated diversity. We celebrated multiculturalism. We began to speak about cultural families, if you have ever heard that expression in our Catholic Church. So they started talking about the Hispanic family, the white Euro-American family, the Asian family, the Black family, Black Catholic family, the Native American family, and so on. So Hispanics then are growing by leaps and bounds, okay? Yet, as the Latino community grows in numbers, it loses on the side of organization. It loses on the side of organization, and it loses on the side of influence, okay? Influencing commitments and so on. In 2000, between 2000 and 2008, something interesting happened, okay? Now, this is important to understand here. There are several dynamics going on. One of them has to do with geopolitics. In 2001, we have 9/11, okay? What happened in 9/11? So the terrorist attacks that reshape our social understanding about immigration, about foreigners, and not only people of the Middle East, but also how we started looking at Asians, how we started looking at Latinos, how we started looking at Black people and people who were not Roman Catholic or even Christian. 9/11 had a major cultural effect, to the point that any gains that we have made in our church and in our society and in our faith communities about being more positive about the presence of immigrants, which we were celebrating only the decade before. We were celebrating that, yay, Latinos and immigrants from Africa and immigrants from Asia. This is a multicultural church. And in 2000, we were happy to be the bastion of multiculturalism. Since 2001, there was a movement. It was a movement of that movement of suspicion towards immigrants and people perceived as foreign was accompanied by a reduction of resources to serve those communities. Okay, reduction to serve these communities. So some of the offices that had been created in the last 2 decades were closed or were merged into the so-called multicultural offices. Okay, then another phenomenon took place in the early 2000s, and that is the sexual abuse of children by clergy and others scandal, the big scandal. That had a major impact in our dioceses, had a major impact in the specialized ministries, okay? Financially, was brutal on the Catholic Church, and it continues to be brutal on the institution. But not only that, perhaps the worst effect of this scandal has been the loss of credibility of our institution, and we have lost. Give or take, you can ask the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate; they have better numbers in Pew than I do. But since 2000 and 2022. Especially in light of these abuse scandals, we have lost at least 15 to 20 million people, Roman Catholics. Most of them were young people, young adults, a lot of young adults, a lot of people, some people just use this as an excuse to leave, could be. Others were so hurt that they just said, I just can't be part of this institution any longer, and the number of vocations plummeted. Okay, men considering the possibility of becoming priests in seminaries and for a diocese, for a church. So it impacted this. It impacted financially, emotionally, spiritually, ecclesially, pastorally. So you got the geopolitics, you got the internal dynamics in the church, and then you got a third movement. The third movement is we have to start consolidating ministries. We got to start consolidating ministries for many reasons. The aging of the leadership. The leadership pools are actually very old in the Catholic Church. Median age of priests in the United States of America, 65. Median age, 65. Median age of sisters, vowed religious women, 73. Okay? Median age of lay ecclesial ministers, 55. Okay? Actually, I'm so glad to see so many young people in this room, That's just amazing, So you defied all the statistics here in the Southeast. You defied. But in general, again, remember what I said at the beginning. I'm giving you the macro picture, I'm giving you this national perspective of what's going on. So as we start losing, the number of pastors and priests and so on, and here in the Southwest and the Southeast, we find, that there is growth of the communities, but the growth of the communities does not match the growth in terms of leadership. So what are bishops doing these days? Well, you need priests. You cannot run parishes without, you cannot run the sacraments. You cannot celebrate the sacraments, preside the Eucharist if there is no clergy. So we got more priests coming from Latin America, coming from Asia, coming from Africa, from Europe, some of them from Europe. So we have a growth in the number of international priests, And at the same time, the operations of many of our parishes need to be consolidated. And what happens when parishes are consolidated? Usually, in dioceses, the specialized ministries tend to be cut off or merged into something else. What were the biggest casualties of all these dynamics? Hispanic ministry, Black ministry, Asian ministry. Okay? Those were the biggest casualties. So eventually, in 2007, the bishops of the United States of America approved a new model, a structural model at the USCCB. So the Secretariat for Black Catholics, the Secretariat for Hispanic Ministry, for Asian Catholics, no, those secretariats disappeared, and they established the so-called Secretariat for Cultural Diversity in the Church, okay? Cultural diversity in the church, so that begins in 2008. Who is the first executive director? Father Alan Figueroa Deck, a Jesuit from California. He comes and works there and establishes this. What's the cultural diversity in the church secretariat? It is a very strange office that brings together Hispanics, Blacks, Asians, immigrants, people who work in circuses, people who are deaf, people who are blind, people who are itinerant, everybody except one group. Which group? White Catholics. So, I mean, aren't white Catholics members of?
Yeah, there's a group there for Poles and European.
Oh, really? That's right. For European, Eastern European immigrants. You're right. That's right. Eastern European immigrants. But this is a secretariat for everybody except Euro-American white Catholics. It's like, are not our Euro-American white Catholic sisters and brothers part of the diversity of the church? You see? This is strange.
There's so few of them.
There's so few of them. Well, they're the minority, usually. So now the question is, notice the ripple effect. The ripple effect is that as dioceses see the USCCB doing that, guess what many dioceses are saying? Like, actually, that's the way to go, you know? And then they start, since 2008, that's how many dioceses have been actually organizing Hispanic ministry and Black ministry and ministry with minoritized communities or underrepresented communities, no? So what are the offices? I'm pretty sure that some of you have been given the redemptive task of leading an office of multicultural ministry, no? So how many of you do that, no? You have done it.
Well, we're working on it.
You're working on it, okay.
We're gonna do all of that. When you said this, I'm like, I know everything now. Everything except the white people.
Okay. So now, okay, I don't know if you want to reconsider after this, you know? Oh, there you have it. In Miami, there is an office of non-Hispanic ethnicities. Wow, that's right. That's creative. In any case, so now we got these offices of Hispanic ministry, of multicultural ministry, and I have spoken with directors of these offices, and they say, well, my annual budget is $50,000, you know? And how do you want me to do anything with these communities? Sometimes you are expected to speak English and Spanish and Nigerian and Vietnamese and I know, and Tagalog and all these, no? So the question is, we are replicating, these offices are replicating the defects of the Hispanic ministry offices in the past, which is we somehow grouped anybody who is not white Catholic, English speaking, into one office, and then all the other offices are not taking responsibility for the rest of the diversity of the church. So the question is, how are your dioceses at this very moment going to reimagine a new model of diocesan ministry that is not going to live? What's your name again?
My name is
Lily. So how do we help Lily so she doesn't have to put on her shoulders 80% of the diocese, you know, while everybody else works with the other 20%?
But I've been the Hispanic ministry director for 10 years.
So you got experience on that anyway. So that's right. So a church now, between 2008 until today, we are using these models of multicultural ministry. I have my misgivings about it, but I also have high hopes for them. You know, they may work well when they get the resources and so on. But frankly, the entire diocese should be the office of multicultural ministry. the entire diocese. So now, what is it? What are the priorities? Today, 2022, there are 62 million Hispanics in the United States of America. 62 million. Remember, only 6 decades ago, there were 6 million. There are 62 million. Of those 62 million Hispanics, 30 million self-identify, 32 million, 30 to 32 million self-identify as Roman Catholic, okay? Keeps growing. Half of those 30 million, 32 million, half of them are foreign born and half of them are US born, okay? That's kind of evenly broken down. That gives you a sense of that community. So the priority today is we are in a church that depends on how we retain a very young population. I mean, the majority of Catholics in the United States of America are not white Euro-American, just to give you a sense, okay? If I were to give you a demographic map of the Catholic community, about 45% of all Catholics in this country are Hispanic. About 5% are Asian. About 4% are Black, and less than 1% are Native American, or less than 1%. That's 55%. So 45% of Catholics in this country right now are white Euro-American, and the numbers are declining. Why? Demographics, friends, just simple demographics, okay? Median age of white Catholics, 55. Median age of Latinos, 29. Median age of Asians, 31, 32. Median age of Black Catholics, Black people, 33. So who's having the babies these days? No, because that defines the future of an institution, and it defines the future of entire cities, towns, neighborhoods, and so on. Okay, so it's important for us to keep this in mind as we plan our ministries. No, so John Allen, about 10 years ago, wrote a book in which he said, which actually I like what he was proposing. He said, all our parishes really need to start looking into new ministries to reach out to the elderly, because that's where a vast population of our community churches are going in the United States, and it's going to be mostly in English, and that's fine. That is fine. So those are ministries that we need. But the ministry that we are going to be doing in terms of catechesis, religious education, social justice, family life, and so on, is going to be primarily a ministry with Hispanic, Black, Asian Catholics. Okay, that's demographics alone tell us that, and we need to start preparing the structures to do that and to do it well. Is that clear?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so where is Gabriela? What's the question that we have, Gabriela? We're going to go back to our tables and then.
Passengers know we're gonna have the first dialogue here. And please complete the form, the Google form in your table. It's this. Yes.
Change is not always for the better. Okay.
We understand that the pastoral is my office is there to support and the different offices of the diocese and the Hispanic ministry. For example, we have office of life, my family and life director. We work together in organizing natural family planning classes. It used to be that we did. No, their run the show, but we help train Hispanics to be able to do it. So we same thing with the tribunal.
Was everything was so compartmentalized. It was like youth ministry was over here, and Hispanic ministry was over here, and Asian ministry was over, and all of them were so, and it was like, and I didn't view it that way, and I still don't, because I thought, because we work with schools and we work with everybody, and all the kids, it's like, no, I need your help. So what can I do for you? And that's kind of how we started collaborating, but the structure is not set up that way.
Right.
We're not in the same buildings either.
Mhm.
We're not in the same buildings none of them, our youth ministry or not. So the structure is not set up that way. So it has to be intentional right now on the individual parts. But that's my takeaway too. It's like, yes, that makes perfect sense, is we have to be integrated. All of us should be doing ministry, multicultural to everybody, because we're evangelizing. So
I think there's a progression, like I was saying yesterday. You have to kind of figure out what the diocese needs, because this model doesn't work the same way across the board. Because dioceses have different numbers in terms of population of Hispanics, but it keeps growing everywhere. They're everywhere, and so that's kind of the thing. But I think once you figure out where you're at in that process, that this Office of Hispanic Ministry is kind of like the one that got us going for the national point, but it's been many, many years, so that needs to be developed into a more integrated model. I think it's the model, and I mean, I'm surprised that the bishop's office took that model after the other model had already worked in places, the integrated model, where in the way, like I was director of youth ministry for 15 years, our office did youth ministry with Anglo, Hispanic, and Haitians, because the common culture of youth was more important than the ethnic culture. So
Right.
we all had that in common. They were all youth. That was more important than an adult trying to do youth ministry because they were Hispanic.
Right.
You know what I'm getting?
Absolutely.
That's what we figured out. Our young people are together in school. They share a lot more than an adult trying to do youth ministry just because they're.
That's just our attack. That might be what we're going with. If we go, okay, here's our but Hispanic ministry is just no, they're just sport. Did you have something?
Yes. Office for we are our name is Edmi, but in Edmi we show up um, hire as director for Hispanic ministry, director for African father my faith. Nobody in other offices speak Spanish. Only I speak Spanish, and but nobody for family for mission. And it's a lot job. It's a lot of work for me. Yeah.
So that makes more work for you because if parishes need someone to speak Spanish, they
Yes.
call you
Yes.
and say, "Hey, can you translate this? Can you do this?"
Yes. For tribunal cases.
So there's a need not just at the diocese level, but at the parish level. I think that's what he's making about, like, how are we cultivating leaders in parishes, on your staffs, but also the diocese level. How can people kind of work together? What are you thinking?
Say something, just even if it's not a consolidated thought.
So I know a person that is from the ministry, Hispanic ministry, but he gets along with the Anglos, like he goes to English mass and all, and some Hispanics think of him like he's not he's leaving the Hispanic ministry to go to the Anglo ministry and just forgetting us, which is that's how people see it, but he's seeing it like a connection, a bridge, like what we're doing now. So,
You think that's good?
eh?
You think it's good?
Yeah, I think it's good to build that. Like you said, is it like what I understood? Is it worth it to have the Hispanic ministry if we can work together and just be one ministry? And that's true. Like we have different cultures, and we need a space to talk about the chancla and all, but we need to communicate and as one. Yeah.
Because I think that's one is that the Hispanics have a lot to offer. I think the Anglo, like both could be enriched. I know even just.
Somebody knocked the door. Open the door. You were two guys, Gentiles. Our boss sent to pick you to my boss' house. Cornelius, a centurion. Peter went to centurion's house. When he entered, he was not allowed to enter because he was a Jew. Huh? But he entered the Cornelius' house, and he saw the fusion of the Holy Spirit coming upon the Gentile. And he was surprised about that. Then he returned to Jerusalem, the first council of Jerusalem, to share that the Gentiles received the Holy Spirit. Then it's a process because even they were the apostles, they didn't understood the whole world. For them, the world was the Jews, the chosen one. Then it was even if that happened with the apostles, the same is happening in the church always. No, those who are up, like Peter, need to have that experience, with the Holy Spirit. And no, it's for everybody.
Not for selecting.
But that part of the act of the apostle give us like to understand, the multicultural, go to the whole world. If they didn't understood at that time, well, we are in the same.
Hispanics, and that to me was a huge message of the fifth encuentro that we really took to heart in our diocese.
I think that building bridges, you've heard of the phrase "Puente Puente."
Yes, it's my favorite.
I really believe that that is a way that we can really build bridges among communities because we need Puente Puente that are advocates. The Office of Hispanic Ministry or us that are involved in Hispanic, sometimes, we advocate, but it's like, oh, you're Latina. It's not that, and I said, yeah, of course. But when you have a John Martin, when you have you, sir, when you have you advocating, right, for all and understand, it carries more weight, right? And I think it's really coming together as one. Because when he explained that the Office of Hispanic Ministry, usually, for the majority of the time, is carrying different roles. So the Office of Hispanic Ministry for Family Life, Pro-Life, Formation, Religious Education is so true. With the lowest budget, right? And that is where I think is an opportunity, all of us that are here, to go back to our diocese and talk to our bishop and everyone else that makes decisions. How can we change that? Let's all working together in collaboration. And then investing. I think he asked, where do we find these leaders? We really have to invest in information and evangelization because if the majority of 62 million Hispanics are in the U.S., half of them are U.S. born, and I know he's going to say some numbers, most of them are under the age of 18. That is where the future leaders are. So I think it's important to support the family, to provide formation, evangelization to their kids, so that in the future, the church itself in the U.S. has someone that's going to be passing on. And it's our time to invest now for who's going to be behind us. So I think that raises a sense of urgency. A sense of urgency that we can no longer say, well, they're Latinos, so they, because if I don't invest in them now, if I have kids and grandkids, and who's going to pass on the faith to them? So it's a job for all.
This presentation definitely raised
Hey, mami, soy famoso, aquí estoy.
only mass, it's only holy hour, but it's never them being out in the field. I always have problems with seminarians not doing pastoral ministry during the time of formation. When I was a seminary in Colombia, I have to go on a weekend and spend my weekend in a parish, helping with the choir, helping with the children, with the real life, because we are training people to live in a parish, but for 8 years we keep them away from the parish. So that makes no sense. So when they go back to the multicultural parish, they don't know how to respond because they have been enclosed in a one reality, which is the formation reality.
I am going to remind you to please send your submit the Google forms so we can have your feedback. We want you to give to everyone pass on all that you have shared at your tables so we can continue building our way. I want to remember if you didn't, you never met him, God bless his soul, Bishop Roman. Bishop Roman, maybe some of you have heard his name before or I want just to remember him as one of the bishops that has walked with and now accompany us from heaven. Um, but he would take any opportunity to do what I'm just going to do now. So I learned many things from him, but this too. So we have these books that have all the Marian applications of Latin America, and they're bilingual. So each country in Latin America has a patroness, Our Lady as a patroness. So here you have all of them. It's only $5. And these images are at CEPI, part of our the historic. If you've never been to CEPI, please come. But if you have not come, prepare by reading this. So please take them. We don't want to take them back with us. And so there are all the books there. Loyola Press is also there. They've been supporting us. Please also stop by there, and you have a break. But those of you who are submitting a Google form, please send it to us. We have about
15 minutes.
15 minutes.
15 to 20. Yeah, 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Very generous.
In English,
Here? Okay. Sí, ¿me presento? ¿Me dices cuándo? ¿No? Hi, everybody. My name is Father Duan Bermudez, Director Office of Hispanic Ministry for the Diocese of Palm Beach. I'm here at the regional encuentro de CEPI. I consider that time is very important for us, as Director of the Office of Hispanic Ministry, for everybody present here, because now we can recognize how the Spanish population have more impact in our church in the United States. I consider that reflection today direct by Dr. Omar Ospino is very interesting because help us to understand what is the process for the Hispanic Latinos in the United States and also how I respond for them, for the special pastoral care for them. I consider it's very important this encuentro for us today. Thank you so much for everybody. It's okay?
Thank you.
Very shortly.
Yes.
Aquí quita la cámara.
Identifícate. En English, ¿puede?
Encounter, the regional, okay. ¿Está de qué? Here in San Agustin, the historical San Agustin, living the encounter, regional encounter, living because the people. Sorry. Can you delete it when it started? Oh, it's like okay. Living the regional encounter, leading by CEPI, where we are reflecting about family, our young people, our we're gonna refresh and it's gonna be a guide for us to go to our dioceses and work with the different ministry. That is, we this morning we had a Dr. Hospino who is leading us with a family, vocation, youth, and later working in as a group is an excellent key. We are very happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry at the beginning.
We're very happy to be here and very happy to celebrate very happy to really discuss the ministry that we're discussing for our Hispanic people. It's been very much something, a place where the church needs to be. We need to make disciples of all of our young people too, especially. So, yeah, wonderful. You're welcome.
Have some parishioners saying hello to you. They saw you before. I have to find out who they were. Let me see. Juliana Skelton.
Yeah,
Okay, she says hello.
yeah. I've got her timed in with y'all now.
Okay.
So we're going to be sending all this out in the diocese too.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Entonces, podemos platicar sobre eso. It's your time now for an interview.
How are you?
Are you enjoying it?
I'm getting a new look at things, and it's inspiring me to go back to my diocese, the Diocese of Charlotte, energized for what the next step is. So thank you.
What's your name?
Sister Joan Pearson.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you. I know they're on big. They run big.
We're just so happy to have you guys here. Hope everything's going well. Yes, ma'am.
Want to share with us what's happening? What are your feelings about it? Anything new?
We're very much enjoying this opportunity to come together, especially in terms of hearing the conversations from what people are doing in their own diocese, their both successes and their struggles. And although each of our dioceses are unique and different, and some have more or less people on staff, it creates an opportunity to see how the Spirit is working in the church to provide growth and to open our eyes of new ways of doing things.
And just the sharing, just the absolute sharing, because one, like you said, one model doesn't fit all, but there's a glimmer in this idea that I can use, or a glimmer in this idea that I can use, or they're doing something that, well, I really couldn't do. So I think that's a real good value
Absolutely.
in the
Okay,
conversation.
well, thank you so much for sharing and for being here.
Oh,
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now you're famous. Want to say a word to the Archdiocese of Miami?
So are you on the board, or you're just with him working in that process? He's a director.
So when are we going to bring him to the diocese to look at minority groups?
Yeah. Good thought.
Yes, I agree. Why don't you engage him to get information and see what he charges for to come in, and maybe he could come in and do a full day event for us. And then we would get what. Yeah. Would that parallel with what you are doing with your committee? I think so too. So find out, and then we'll check and see if we can do it.
Caught up in your mind. Caught up in your mind, friend.
Well, when I had 5 Hispanic cards,
That's what it's for.
yeah. They're very generous.
The idea of, treat on this, I think around the Hispanic, I look at it.
Yeah, I just told Deacon Juan we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to read them, give them to him, and then I want to give them to his formation team, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Hispanic deacons on the formation. I want them all to read it for sure as well. Yeah, 5 Hispanic deacons on the formation. Yeah.
And they're both on the
Yeah, but we only have 5, and they're all on the formation. And we have a island priest that engages with us a lot. He helped us with the evaluations for asking. Yeah, different thought processes, different thought processes. It's good to see, you know, to see from the parish priest. We should have one.
So what did we decide to do at Jenkins? Please. Yes.
What do we decide to do?
Yeah.
Our old Victor General said I had it up to here with deacons. So he got rid of all of it.
That's one approach.
More Hispanic deacons.
We're going to hear a presentation from Biloxi this afternoon about how to do it.
Yeah, we really pushing in that direction as well. Our bishop, Jezebel, told us when we first got there, one of the first things he told me is the academic directors. He said, we know a Hispanic program and we need to engage our administrators. We have
He's brought that perspective.
We have six people here from our diocese who are all ministry directors. We're going to engage in that.
That's not everywhere in the yet.
So that's what I'm understanding. He's got a good job. I've been had on his shoulders and really a good direction. Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah, you guys are far ahead of everybody else. Juan said how quick your program is.
Right now, I'm just getting good internet connectivity. We're doing that last, this last week, we're working hard on it. We're gonna have a hotspot, people. Synergy is the best retreat center having internet universal, which they rent from AT&T. So that's where add-ons and they actually anyway, they go to but we think that have a hot spot practice twice a year. And media
Okay, friends, let's resume our conversation.
What do you mean by inverse?
And they have very good internet connectivity. So the problem is not internet connectivity, but the speaker system. It's very obvious. Still, two here are driving. That's right. But I would explain it to the idea of not.
One, two, three. So let's move on to our next, the next part of our conversation. One of the key one of the key questions that we need to ask ourselves is, okay, we are here in the midst of this changing church, different structures. We got the challenge of the Latino community, and it's, again, both blessing and challenge. And we need to reimagine, in many ways, how we respond to the Hispanic presence. So you got to start somewhere. And I think that one way for many of us to begin to reimagine Hispanic ministry and how we approach Hispanic ministry is by focusing on young people, on youth. And I mean, and the commitment is very obvious. Why young people? Well, because most adult Catholics who are coming to our churches, the chances are is that they are going to keep coming to our churches. They're going to stay. Those who are gone, most likely they are gone, and that's it. Those who are not practicing, eventually they will practice and so on. But if we're going to look at this from a significant, I mean, rather transactional perspective, looking at long term, if we're able to commit to get a 25-year-old person engaged in their faith, loving Jesus Christ, madly in love with Jesus Christ, with their faith, then we have a Catholic for the next half a century, at least 50 years or so. Okay, so the question is, are we doing a good job in that regard? What are we doing? Let me, before I talk about the study and the results, let me give you what Father Alan Figueroa Deck, whom I mentioned earlier, calls the tale of two churches. He calls it the tale of two churches. So in the United States of America, we got used, we have grown used to a paradigm of a church that is, the church that we inherited from the 1960s, 50s, 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, which is a church largely Euro-American, white, English-speaking, and also a very middle-class church, okay? So let's not lose sight of that. White Catholic has a 4-year college degree, okay? That already, I mean, white Catholics are the second best educated group in this nation. After which group? Not Asians, Jews, after the Jewish community. So education catapulted the white Euro-American community into this middle upper class, And of course, there are many white Catholics who are poor, low levels of education, who struggle significantly, and so on. But I mean, when you look at the question at leadership in general, just think of, for instance, of all the bishops of the United States of America. Okay, majority are white and English-speaking, many of them monolingual. So when you look at presidents of Catholic colleges and universities, the immense majority are white, Euro-American, English-speaking. If you look at priests in the United States of America, the majority white, Euro-American, English-speaking. If you look at nuns, the same dynamic. Catholic school teachers, same dynamic. If you look at college, at seminary professors, the vast majority white, Euro-American, English-speaking, monolingual. So the influence of white Euro-American Catholics is huge in a church, and much of that influence has to do precisely with that social location that I'm describing, So many of them went through Catholic schools, many of their parents are also went through Catholic schools, but having college education, as much as we derive college education and so on, actually it works, and it works quite well. All of you, all of us in here would not be in our dioceses, running offices, being in ministry, the way we do it, if we don't have this college education. That has been the holy grail in many ways of what we do. So now the question is, how do we make sure that what we have benefited from is also others will do that. And particularly when we know that the Latino community, and actually that the majority of Catholics under 25 are Hispanic, Black, Asian, okay, and speak different languages. All of them, the majority are English speaking as well. But we have entered into a moment of the history of the church in which bilingualism is actually the de facto way of being linguistically in the Catholic Church. No? The United States of America, Catholicism is de facto bilingual. It's English and Spanish. No? So we know that in the Catholic Church, in this country, more than 40 million Catholics are Spanish speaking. And I'm not talking only about the Latinos who are Spanish speaking. There is millions of Latinos, of white Catholics, Black Catholics, and others who are Spanish speaking. So Spanish is a language that unites us with the rest of the continent. But that's not the tale of the two churches. The tale of the two churches is this. Says Father Alante. We got used to this idea that there is a white church, American church, largely middle class, successful, and has done well, and it shows the influence not only within the church but also outside the church. Think, for instance, about the politicians that we have, who are Roman Catholic. Most of them are white Euro-American. Think about the millionaires, and the business people, the highly influential people in terms of finances, in terms of politics, in terms of the arts. The majority of them who are Catholic are white Euro-American, Euro-American as well. So we got this major influence. And on the other hand, we have everybody else, just like those offices of multicultural ministries, no? So we got everybody else. Some of these people also have benefited from these dynamics, but most of them are catching up, literally, after centuries of being behind. And so Hispanics, I mean, just think about it, no? It was here in the South, desegregated. It was until the 1940s, you see? And Black children were not welcomed in most Catholic schools in the United States of America. Hispanics, catching up, in terms of these dynamics. And we need to imagine, how the structures that we have serve everybody. Because what we have here is, we have, on the one hand, a set of structures, colleges, schools, ministries, that are run primarily or largely by Euro-American white Catholics, but do not know well how to work with, particularly Hispanics. You can throw into the equation how to work with Asians and how to work with Black Catholics that well. And on the other hand, we got this church. Oh, by the way, these structures have a lot of resources. They got money, they got personnel, they got history. They also have, what Pierre Bourdieu called social capital. They got social capital. So these institutions work very well. They know how to navigate systems, economic systems. For instance, I have a lot of friends who work in the field of philanthropy, which is fascinating, Catholic philanthropy. And you know what they tell me? That most of the asks come from whom? The white Catholic community. Most of the asks about projects and so on come from highly educated white Euro-American pastoral leaders, whether ordained or not ordained. Okay? Why? Because they know how to do that. They know the system has prepared them. History has prepared them to do this. Many Latinos don't know how to ask for money from a philanthropic organization. So these underrepresented communities, Latinos know how to work well with Latinos. Believe me, you want to make a difference in your office about Hispanic ministry, hire 2 or 3 Latinos and you will see how things change. African Americans know how to work very well with the Black Catholic community. They know how to do well because that's their life. They breathe that ministry, and you want to change anything about black outreach to the black community, 2 or 3 black ministers, no? Or, for instance, invite an African-American priest, and you will see how things change. The challenge is that these people have the knowledge. They know the how to, but they don't have the structures. Sometimes they are not even part of the structures. They're not even part of the structures. Many of us, many of our dioceses, many of our offices, and that applies to universities, that applies to offices, that applies to schools, we still operate out of the token system, okay? The token system. We hire the one Latino person, or the one black person, or the one Asian person, and then we ask that person to carry the weight of their entire community within our particular system, okay? So, I wanted to begin this because that's how you are going to understand what I want to share about this particular study. In the United States of America, Catholics, have done a superb job in terms of creating structures to support youth ministry. When you look at what your American Catholics have done, or American Catholics have done to support youth ministry, and then you compare it to the rest of the world, frankly, I don't see a match anywhere. I don't see a match. Some European countries might have done something good, but not at the scale that we have done it in the United States. We have done it in terms of schools, for instance. White Euro-American Catholics, or Catholics in this country, built more than 13,000 Catholic schools to support young people and keep them Catholic. Amazing, amazing. No other country has built such a large and well-organized system of Catholic schools as the United States of America. There are other initiatives. There are Catholic schools that have over time have grown or disappeared, or efforts in Catholic education, but not as organized as the United States of America. The work of youth ministry in Catholic parishes, there was a time in the history of this country, which is only a few years ago, when almost the majority of Catholic parishes had someone hired full-time to run youth ministry. That is wild when you think about it. In Latin America, you don't see that. You don't see that in Latin America. You don't see that in Asia. You don't see that in Africa. We don't have the resources to do that. In the United States of America, we do. Yeah, then at the national level, we develop these superstructures like the NFCYM, for instance, and many of you have worked with the NFCYM, NCYC, and all these different organizations that support youth ministry. What's the challenge with many of these organizations? Besides the fact that they are very organized and they are sophisticated in their approaches, many of them have not actually succeeded that much in working well with underrepresented communities. With the Black community, with the Asian community, with the Hispanic community. We have a growing number of, for instance, of communities in the Midwest that do camps. And I don't know how many of you in your diocese, for instance, do camps. But the camp movement, Christian Catholic camp movement in the Midwest is huge. We're talking about tens of thousands of young people being benefited by Catholic camps in the Midwest. But most of those kids benefiting from this are white, Euro-American, most of them middle-class kids, okay? So, with that in mind, we partnered with a philanthropic organization and with a few other advisors and so on, and we said, we need to figure out a way to help, identify the Hispanic communities, some organizations in the Hispanic community that are doing excellent work with Latino youth, and see what is it that they are doing well, and then how we can share that wisdom with the organizations that have the resources but still do not find a way to work well with these other organizations. So that's what pretty much led us into this study. Some key realities, in terms of context that will help us. The first thing that we need to understand is that 60% of all Catholics under 18 are Hispanic. So give or take. That is a huge number. Now, 60%. So if anybody is, if anybody is hoping for a miracle right now, for a miracle, right now in terms of, seeing an upsurge of young Euro-American white kids, it might happen. It might happen, but it's not going to match the rise of the Latino community. It's not going to match the rise of the Asian community. I mean, this entire conference has been about Hispanics, okay? Because that's what Olga invited me to do with you. But the fastest growing group in the Catholic Church is not Hispanics, it's Asians, So if you're struggling with Spanish, try some Vietnamese, no? So now, so that's gonna tell you. Right now, in the United States of America, when you take all the Catholic population under 18, white Catholics are barely 20-25%. Barely 20-25%. So here, this conference is not about the present. It's not about how do we maintain things, because that's what Pope Francis says. This is when Pope Francis says that we need pastoral conversion. Many of us engage in pastoral planning to maintain what we have and do what we have done for the last 10, 15, 20 years. This is a conference to imagine the future. So these young women and men who are younger than 18, okay, 10 years from now, they're going to be having babies. And they are still Roman Catholic today. The question is, what are your offices going to do to keep them Catholic and stay in the church and then raise their kids in the Catholic faith? That's our ultimate goal, okay? They are the ones who are going to be paying our salaries. Yes. They're going to be the ones who are going to be supporting our churches, okay? And let's be honest. Churches need the middle class. Need the middle class. You don't meet a $2 million budget just on Hail Marys and Our Fathers. You don't. You're pastors, you're bishops, you know these matters. So the challenge is we need to make sure that this generation has jobs, that will pay them well so they can support the church and they can support the schools and they can support our faith communities. I mean, let's be pragmatic. Catholic schools run on philanthropy. Most of them run on philanthropy. Our parishes run on the generosity of people. But if people have jobs, for instance, we know that 20% of Hispanics live below the poverty level, okay? 20%. Poverty level in the United States of America is $24,000 a year for a family of 4 before taxes. Family of 4. How many of us can raise a family on $24,000 before taxes, for an entire year? My students at Boston College, our undergraduate students, that's what they spend on, petty cash, with their friends and so on. It's just, unfortunately, that's a fact of life. Well, how do we expect that someone making that amount of money will support our church? So we need to make sure that these Hispanics become teachers and engineers and doctors, and they become lawyers, and that they become professionals so they can support our church. Okay, that's where the investment is. So in a sense, it's a self-investment. The priests, as far as I know, they don't come from heaven with little wings, coming down. Priests come from our families. They come from our communities. And in the United States of America, if you don't have a bachelor's degree, very rarely a seminary will accept you. You need to have a bachelor's degree, okay? Well, only 16% of adults in the United States of America has a 4 years bachelor's degree. 16% of Hispanics has a 4-year college degree. And most of them are women. We don't ordain women, okay? So the pool is even smaller when it comes to males. So those are the facts of life. We cannot do ministry. We cannot plan ministry just, again, based on good wishes. We need to be pragmatic. And that starts in parishes, but dioceses need to help pastors and pastoral leaders to imagine what type of ministry is necessary with young people. I love Catholic schools. I'm a huge advocate, passionate advocate of Catholic education. But only 4%, or only 2% of Hispanic children go to Catholic schools, So most of the Hispanic children are going to public schools. Where is the strategy of the Catholic Church in our dioceses, in our parishes, to go and put pressure in our public school systems so they offer quality education to our children? We don't have one. We don't have one. We need that. That's what we need to do. We need to reimagine a strategy so that 60% of kids will be able to build the communities of tomorrow, build the communities of tomorrow. Most young Hispanics, younger than 18, are US born, 94%. Notice this, because many of us are used to treating the Hispanic community as largely an immigrant community. Well, guess what? The Hispanic church of 10 years from now is going to be mostly, look at that, you see it there, 94% US born. When somebody tells me I don't do Hispanic ministry because I don't speak Spanish, I always answer, don't worry. Just don't have to worry. These people are English speaking. Did you know that 35% of Hispanics do not speak Spanish? That's a different ball game. This is not the 1980s. This is not the 1990s. That's why I gave you the historical perspective. We need to start planning ministry, Hispanic ministry, for the 21st century, for 2030, for 2040, for 2050. And these are the people who are doing that, 2/3 of young adults, 2/3 of young adult Hispanics are US born, okay? 2/3 of young adult Hispanics are US born. So technically, when we look at the Hispanic community, yes, we need to invest in the immigrant community, and that's very, very much important. We need to keep doing that work, but institutionally and structurally, it's time to start shifting gears as fast as we can to serve and retain that US-born population, okay? Because that's the one that we're losing. That's the one that we are losing. Pew Religion did a study, telling us, based on their names, are former Catholics. Most of them made the decision of leaving the Catholic Church before the age of 24, okay? Before the age of 24. So for those of you who are doing youth ministry, or doing evangelization, or doing Catholic education, and so on, well, that's our population. That's our population. How do we retain it? How do we work with them? Most young Hispanics do not participate in traditional ecclesial activities, programming, and efforts, either by choice or because of lack of outreach, okay? Let me just give you the stark reality, I like to play with numbers because, numbers help, statistics help, but also I'm mindful that statistics are approximations, but they give us a good picture. Let's do the math. 2% of Hispanics, Hispanic Catholic children, children and youth are enrolled in Catholic schools. We know that about 10% of Hispanic children and youth are enrolled in religious education programs. That's kind of ballpark, 10%. And we also know that about 8 to 10% of Hispanic youth are engaged in some form of youth ministry. That brings you up to close to 20%. The question is, where's the other 80%? Not catechesis, not Catholic education, not youth ministry. How are they going to learn their faith? How are they going to learn to love Jesus? How are they going to learn the scriptures? How are they going to learn spirituality? This is why Pope Francis, his invitation makes perfect sense. We have to go out in salida. We need an evangelization that reaches out. If we continue to wait for these Hispanic young people to come to our church, we're going to stay there waiting. We're going to stay there waiting. We have to go out and reach out to them. And lastly, many Catholic organizations reaching out to the Hispanic youth need to make major adjustments. No? So just as an exercise, for instance, those of you who are in offices of youth ministry, young adult ministry, Catholic education, just by numbers, how many Hispanics do you engage every year compared to the rest of the population? Just as simple as that. For the language, don't worry about the language. How many, whether you do it in Spanish, how many do you reach out in English? How many do you reach out in Spanglish? Did you know that Spanglish is the fastest growing linguistic phenomenon in the United States of America? Yes. So brace for that one, no? So we need to start making adjustments. So the study is this one. We looked at 12 organizations that, after consulting with pastoral leaders, with educators, and with many others, we went out and asked people, who do you know is doing youth ministry in an interesting way, in a good way, in a creative way, okay? And to be honest with you, most of the examples were not dioceses, were not parishes, but they were organizations. So we said, well, instead of overly focusing on organizations or parishes, and there are some that are doing a really good job, we decided to keep the study focused on organizations. And we have this one, Iscali. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Iscali. It's one of the most creative projects in youth ministry, Catholic youth ministry, right now in the United States. And it's a youth ministry that is for Latinos. Retreats, it's based on retreats, supporting small communities. Fascinating work. You can look at it. 2, Centros San Juan Diego, Arts, Cultural, and Faith Formation. This is a center that actually runs out of the Office of Religious Education. The founder, Dr. Veronica Reyes, noticed that, for instance, the Hispanic kids with whom she worked at the border in El Paso, they respond better, they engage better when you use the arts. Music, theater, painting, poetry, writing, and reading. So that's what she does. She created an entire center where the children come and learn the arts, and through the arts, they are evangelized. They learn about Mary, they learn about the saints, they do games, and so on. Fascinating experience. Small scale. All these efforts are small scale, okay? This is not the NFCYM. This is our small scale efforts. 3, Corazón Puro in the Bronx, New York. Some of you might have met Father Agustino. What's his last name? Agustino Torres. Agustino Torres. So Father Agustino Torres, Franciscan of the Primitive Order, in the Bronx, he developed this ministry of accompaniment of young people, particularly couples, family, and focusing on questions of purity, questions of values, sexual values, and so on, and is having a major impact in the Bronx, transforming, working with poor people. And then now he branched out with other leaders into Texas and Hawaii and other parts of the country, working primarily with Latinos. Centro Carismático Católico, the Bronx. If you have ever worked with the Catholic Charismatic Renewal and you have invited young people to engage. In this particular spirituality, you know what this group is all about. This group every year engages teenagers, young adults in retreats, that transform their lives, seminars of life in the spirit, and so on. Why is this important? Because 55% of parishes with Hispanic ministry has a Catholic charismatic and renewal group. 55%. Many pastoral leaders kind of shied away from the charismatic renewal. They're like, that's not for me, that's not my spirituality, that is too much for me, I don't clap, I don't have the gift of tongues, and all the stuff that we have our critique. And we have the same critiques about other ecclesial movements. But guess what? They are the ones that are retaining many of these young people. The Catholic charismatic renewal is one of the biggest sources of retention for Filipino young Catholics as well. Just to give you a sense of the impact. 5, Fuerza Transformadora, Diocese of Little Rock, former gang member, goes to a youth group when he was a young person. He was in his early 20s. He goes to a youth group. He's all tattooed, big guy, former gang member. Shows up to a youth group. The youth group dissolves the same day. They said they would rather not meet than having a Latino gang member, former gang member in the community. He went again. They did not accept him. Then he went to the bishop, and then told the bishop, "Bishop, I want to do youth ministry." And the bishop looked at him and said, "Okay, so let's start slow." Well, you know what? The bishop eventually hired him to work in the ministry for Latinos who were perpetrators of violent acts, people who are recovering from addictions, people who are still struggling with addictions, not even welcome in our churches or in our ministries, nor at the diocesan or parish level. 6, Instituto Fe y Vida is the largest institute in this country, forming leaders to do Hispanic youth ministry or Pastoral Juvenil Hispana. It has been in place for more than 25 years, operates out of Chicago. Fascinating. It's the lead organization at this point. Southeast Pastoral Institute, Miami, CEPI. I don't need to introduce you to CEPI, So CEPI, by far, with the Pascua Juvenil and many other programs of outreach to youth, has become one of the standard institutions in the country to work with Latinos, with young Latinos. Has done it well, and actually many people. You are lucky to have CEPI. Most dioceses in the United States of America do not have a regional pastoral center for Hispanic ministry. As a matter of fact, I encourage the bishops to keep supporting CEPI, and I encourage all of you from your diocese to keep investing in CEPI and benefiting from the fruits that CEPI provides. Damascus camps, So this is one of the many ministries that are emerging. This is out of the Midwest in Ohio. In Damascus, tens of thousands of children every year go to 1-week camps. Most of them are white, yet they began investing in the Hispanic community and are doing very well. They are doing very well, yet the efforts are very small. But we added them here because of their effort they are making the Latino idea of camps. Yet, when they hired young Latinos to do this, they transformed the entire ministry. Ministry of Lo Cotidiano, Dominican University. These are based in institutions of higher education. Ministry of Lo Cotidiano, Dominican University. These are, Dominican is a Hispanic serving institution, okay? In the United States of America, when a university has 40% when 40% of the student population or more is Hispanic, they become a Hispanic serving institution, just like we have Black serving institutions as well in higher education. So Dominican University developed this program that their undergraduate service, and it's transforming the way these students, many of these students graduate, and when they graduate, become professionals, and they actually continue to do what they learned in the university. Latino Scholars Program in the Javier Institute for Catholic Leadership at the University of St. Thomas, Minnesota. Another group. This group is slightly different. Instead of sending people to work in the barrios, in the neighborhoods, although they still connect them to the neighborhoods, the Latino Scholars Program focuses on two dynamics. One, they want to make sure that these young Latinos, Latinas are strong Catholics. They take theology classes, they have strong spirituality components, and they connect them with professionals in different fields. And these young people are making a difference once they graduate. Cristo Rey High School, Jesuit High School in Chicago. There are many Cristo Rey high schools, but we chose this one because it was the first one. It was arbitrary anyway. So it was Cristo Rey. Cristo Rey high schools are making a major difference as an innovative model of Catholic education, primarily serving Hispanic and Black students. This one serves primarily Hispanic students. And Newman Ministry, campus ministry. So campus ministry that is working quite well. So these are the programs. Most of these programs are not programs that have a lot of resources. Some of them have more resources than others, but they work on a small scale. What's the difference in those 12? All the leaders are Hispanic. All the leaders are Hispanic, the leaders who are advancing them. So we wanted to see, when you hire a Latino, when you have a Hispanic priest, when you have a Hispanic sister, when you have a Hispanic lay leader or a teacher, a theologian, what difference does it make as you run these organizations? So we ran a study for a year and a half, and we looked at these three dynamics. One, we looked at their mission, we looked at their structural viability, how they are organized, financial health, assessment mechanisms, and then what levels of innovation they have. But all of it, and frankly, I'm a pastoral theologian, so I'm not that interested only in the numbers. I'm interested in the numbers because I want to see how they affect evangelization, how they help us to evangelize better. So they all these dynamics are always channeled through a theological lens, evangelization, spirituality, and the concept of pastoral juvenil hispana. So I'll skip this one. Somebody, when we went through all the data, we had interviews, we had focus groups, we collected programs, studied them and analyzed them. Then we said, okay, our funder, asked us, what's the secret sauce? Which is not much of a theological question that I know, or a sociological question. But they asked us, what is it that's working in these groups? Because many of these groups could easily dissolve because they don't have that many resources, But here you have Latinos providing a vision. What is working? And we went through the data and we identified pillars. There are 10 pillars that we identified that actually are present in nearly every one of these groups. And we believe, based on our study, that if a ministry program, whether it's evangelization, family ministry, youth ministry, campus ministry, and so on, if a program integrates many of these as possible, it's quite likely that those programs will actually be successful in reaching out to Latinos, okay? So what are the 10 pillars of success? Now, disclaimer, this is what the church has been doing for centuries, friends. So a lot of this is not news to many of us who've been working on this. But sometimes many programs, when you assess other programs outside of the Latino community, many of those programs don't have most of these pillars. One, strong emphasis on community. Strong emphasis on community. Every one of those programs builds small communities or connects young people to their parish community. That's something that we found fascinating, for instance, about the Newman Ministry, the Camps Ministry, the ministries that work with the Catholic Charismatic Renewal. All those ministries are either create small communities or they actually connect you to your own parish community. Why is this important? Because Latinos, in general, in general, I'm not saying that everyone, but in general, actually possess or share an organic understanding of life, meaning or community. So being a Latino, in many ways, the person understands himself or herself as part of a larger whole, and that somehow runs counter to the individualism that oftentimes prevails in our society. So, our society, highly influenced by Protestantism, emphasizes the idea of my relationship with Jesus Christ. I am saved because I believe in Jesus Christ, because I choose to go to church, because I choose to believe. I. In the Latino community, there's a strong communal dynamic that actually these organizations are tapping into, and they are making it a resource for their ministry programs. 2, sense of belonging. Pure Religion has done surveys of these 16 million people, general samples from the people who left the Catholic Church, Hispanics who left the Catholic Church. Number one reason these young people say why they left the Catholic Church. When you interview white Catholics, former white Catholics, then usually the reasons why they left the Catholic Church is, I don't like my bishop, I don't like my pastor, I don't like this doctrine, I disagree with this, I don't want to live that, and so on. You have a fight with something. When you interview former Hispanic Catholics, what's the number one reason? Is, I was there and nobody paid attention to me. You're right. I don't belong. I was never felt that I belonged to this church. My family was rejected because they spoke with an accent or because they didn't speak English. I was not accepted in the Catholic school. I was not accepted in the youth group, and on and on and on. Okay? These ministries, all of them, have actually bent over backwards to make, campus ministry groups excel at doing this. 3, attention to vulnerability. Latinos, as I mentioned earlier, many Latinos are struggling. 9 million of Hispanics in this country are undocumented. We know that 1 million young adult Hispanics are DACA. So these are people who could study, could go to college, but they cannot advance that much professionally because they have this roadblock, in terms of their documents. They were born, they were raised in this country. Many young Latinos live in poverty. Many young Latinos struggle with addictions. Did you know that more than 60% of gang members in the United States of America are Hispanic? More than 60%, okay? So, and many of them are Roman Catholic. This is why Father Greg Boyle, if you wanna read an uplifting story, Father Greg Boyle in Los Angeles has the largest gang intervention program in the world, not just in the United States, but in the entire world, all faith-based, okay? Most of those young kids are Hispanic. So these groups are paying attention to the vulnerabilities of these Hispanics, In the studies that they do about socio-emotional development, many young Hispanics struggle with anxiety, but it's not the anxiety of not having money. It's not the anxiety of not knowing what to do with my college degree or so on. It is the anxiety of living in between. They are not American enough for the Anglo population, and they are not Hispanic enough for the immigrant Latino population. So being in that in-between pulls them up. And we don't, frankly, I see this in some ways with it now. Now that they are spending more time outside their home, I'm beginning to see that. And I see it in my college students. And I see it in the young people who go to my parish. There is this internal anxiety. There's this anxiety among them because they wanna be part of something. but sometimes they don't feel that they belong to the church. They feel that they don't belong to the parish. They don't feel that they don't belong to the white community. They don't belong to the immigrant community. It's like living in a limbo, okay? Existential limbo. These organizations are paying attention to those vulnerabilities. They are doing that. 4, connection to family. Family is important to the Latino community, you know? Family is very important. Family values, regardless. Latinos, I would say that millions of Latinos, maybe half or more, are living in broken family arrangements, you know? Family separation, single motherhood, poverty, family abandonment, divorce, name it, okay? Yet, Latinos have a strong sense of family. And all these programs use the concept of family and connect to family life in a very powerful way. 5, all 12 programs have a leadership component. So this is not just come to church for the sake of coming to church, but we're gonna empower you. And actually, I'm gonna use the word empowerment, is number 7. We are gonna empower you to be a leader in church and society. This happens in colleges. Instituto Fe y Vida and CEPI are at the forefront, particularly in empowering young leaders so they can be leaders in parishes. This is key. This is why we need these institutes. 6, culture matters. Stop being Latino or Black or being Asian in order to worship or to participate in church life. You know, I don't know where that came from, but that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You know, when you're a Black person, you can't leave your skin at the entrance of the church, you know, or when you are a Latino, you cannot leave your brownness or whatever you want to call it, you know, outside. We are who we are, and culture matters, you know, practices, rituals, and so on. And these organizations are very intentional, all of them. That's something that we discovered. All of them are very intentional in using language, in using traditions, and so on. No? 7, I already spoke about empowerment. 8, Catholic identity. Now, I have to, I'm gonna share one of the biases that I had, you know. From my perspective, I mean, many of those organizations are very social justice oriented, very social justice oriented. And I thought, well, these people are not going to talk that much about Catholic identity in these organizations. That's not going to. Well, I was totally wrong. Totally wrong. They are in love with the Catholic identity and the Catholic tradition. You see it through their programs. They all want these young people to have a sound experience of Catholicism and be good Catholics. So I mean, kudos to all these organizations because of that commitment. Faith, 9, faith formation component. All of them have a faith formation component, you know, catechesis, classes, and so on, theology. And the last one, which again was a bit of a surprise, although it should not be a surprise, and that is el impulso misionero. They all have, you know, a sense of missionary activity. They push in that direction. So, let's look at pillar number 1, community. Notice how, you know, in all these different organizations, the pillars are manifested in different ways, no? I mean, for those of you who are worried about so many numbers and letters there, the study is going to be out in November, in early November. So I'm going to forward it to Olga, and then Olga will share it with all of you. Okay, so don't worry about all the details. I'm just giving you a taste of what this is all about, because this can help you in your own planning in your ministries. So the pillar of community. In this pillar of community, you see, how it is, how the language in their programming or the language in their commitments reflects a commitment to community. For instance, this organization speaks of community as a second home. And it's all ingrained in their language. That's how they present themselves. This community speaks of, this group speaks of community as missionary disciples. This one, this is a Catholic school. They say, we are a place that we build together. The students have a say. The parents have a say. The teachers have a say. 4, reflective practitioners, spirit-guided community of support, engaged scholars, witnesses, small ecclesial communities, network, Easter-driven leaders. That's actually CEPI. CEPI uses this language, no? We are a community of Easter-driven leaders. So what can you do? How can you integrate? How can we begin to use data that emerges from this? One is, let's see. One, when the study comes out, only 4 weeks from now, you know, and you have a chance to study it, to discuss it, and so on. Again, I invite you to do that, not because I did it, although because I did it too, you know, but just, you know, it's a good tool. So sit down and discuss it, and then reassess your ministries with youth and young adult Catholics, you know, especially with Hispanic youth, and ask yourselves: do we take culture seriously? Do we provide a sense of belonging? Are we actually honoring and empowering these young Latinos, Latinas? 2, review current resources. Personnel, you know, I mean, if you have a diocese where 50% of the Catholic population is Hispanic, and you only have 2 Hispanics or 1 Hispanic person working at the diocesan level, maybe at the time of hiring, you need fresher hiring practices. How are you promoting vocations to priesthood, religious life, permanent diaconate, and so forth? Curriculum, spaces, presence of it on the internet and social media, and then determine leadership of information needs, and finally, identify mechanisms of permanent support, you know, beyond ecclesial silos. In other words, we continue to work alone. How do we imagine a pastoral de conjunto, an opportunity of working together, a collaborative ministry that takes these dynamics into consideration? Okay, so I get excited when I talk about these matters, and I know that you are hungry as well. And but I also hope that you're excited about some of these ideas, you know, and that this sparks something. The schedule, you know, was supposed to integrate some questions and answers and some conversation and so on, but with the permission of the organizers and Olga and so on, I think that we're gonna stop now and proceed to have lunch and the events of the afternoon. Towards the end of the afternoon, I'm gonna come back here, and then based on what you have heard, you know, from these presentations and what you have heard in the afternoon, maybe we can do a little bit of back and forth with questions that you may have or comments that you may have. Is that okay? Yeah, because lunch is important, you know, and that's just there are priorities, no? Olga, so.
Vamos a bendecir los alimentos que vamos a compartir en el nombre del Padre, del Hijo y del Espíritu Santo. Amén. Gracias, Señor, por permitirnos reunirnos.